In 1987, a Buick was the fastest American production car on the streets. The GNX, powered by a turbocharged 3.8-liter V6, launched from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 4.7 seconds, outrunning the Corvette, Ferrari 328 GTS, and even the Lamborghini Countach. With a Corvette turbo, an air-to-air intercooler, and 400 pounds per foot of torque, it demolished muscle cars that relied on big block V8s. This all-black menace was a legend in the making. But what made this turbocharged sleeper a nightmare for sports cars? Let's find out. But first, hit the subscribe button for more about car news. We need to go back in time to the 1970s, when a group of rogue engineers at Buick decided to experiment with forced induction. It all started with Ken Baker, a young engineer in Buick's test lab, who saw potential in turbocharging. In 1973, he put together a Boy Scout Explorer program at Buick, where kids could learn about engineering. As a side project, they decided to turbocharge Buick's newly revived 3.8-liter V6. They scraped together parts, built an engine, and threw it in a scrap Skylark. The result? A car that was way faster than it had any right to be. Word of the project got out, and Buick's chief engineer at the time, Lloyd Royce, called Baker into his office. Baker thought he was in trouble. Instead, Royce wanted to know if the turbocharged V6 actually worked. 2 weeks later, Baker was put in charge of making it a production engine. But Buick didn't just want to sell it in ordinary cars, they wanted to showcase its potential on the biggest stage possible. In 1976, Buick got the chance to build an Indy 500 pace car, and they decided to push the turbo V6 to its absolute limit. They cranked up the boost to 21 psi, more than the methanol-fueled race cars it was leading, and built an engine with a knock sensor and an early version of electronic spark control, allowing it to run at the edge of detonation without blowing up. That thing was so fast that Dan Gurney took it for a spin and burned through 4 sets of tires in just a few laps. By 1978, Buick put the turbo V6 into production, rated at 165 horsepower. By 1984, when the Grand National got serious, it was making 200 horsepower. But Buick wasn't satisfied. They wanted to take things even further. Buick Assistant Chief Engineer Don Runkle and Vehicle Chief Tom Wallace had one goal: beat the Corvette. The Grand National's secret weapon? It was the Garrett T3 turbocharger, which forced compressed air into the sequential fuel-injected 3.8-liter engine, maximizing power output. But Buick engineers knew that high intake temperatures could rob power and lead to detonation. So, in 1986, they introduced an air-to-air intercooler, dropping intake temperatures and allowing for more aggressive timing. The results were devastating for the competition. The 86 Grand National hit 0 to 60 miles per hour in 4.9 seconds, quicker than a Ferrari 328 GTS, a Chevy Camaro IROC Z, and even the Corvette of the same year. Then came 1987, the final year of Grand National production, and Buick wanted to go out with a bang. They bumped the turbo V6 to 245 horsepower and 355 pounds per foot of torque. The intercooler got better, the engine got more refined, and the blacked-out body still looked as mean as ever. This was the fastest Grand National yet, and the public knew it. Demand exploded. Buick sold 20,740 Grand Nationals that year, almost 4 times more than in 1986. But Buick wasn't just going to end production with a standard Grand National. They had one final trick up their sleeve: enter the GNX. This wasn't just another Grand National, this was something else entirely. Buick engineers knew they had already built a street monster with the Grand National, but now they wanted the ultimate version, a car that would leave a mark in performance history. The plan started modestly, just 200 units as a limited farewell. Then, someone suggested 500, a nod to legendary races like the Indy 500 and the Daytona 500. Finally, Buick settled on 547, mainly due to a dealership incentive program. But numbers aside, Buick wasn't about to slap a badge on a Grand National and call it a day. No, they were about to create something much, much wilder. The GNX was going to be the fastest, most menacing, most refined version of the Grand National ever made. And to make that happen, Buick knew they couldn't do it alone. So, they turned to ASC McLaren, a company known for pushing performance cars to the limit. This wasn't the McLaren of today, building hypercars like the P1 or the 720S, but it was still a company deeply rooted in motorsports and high-performance engineering. Buick's goal was simple: build the fastest GM production car of its time. So, how do you take an already terrifyingly quick Grand National and make it even faster? First, you go straight for the heart, the turbocharged 3.8-liter V6. Buick swapped out the standard Corvette T3 turbo and replaced it with a larger Corvette AI Research turbocharger featuring a lightweight ceramic turbine wheel. That upgrade alone made a huge difference. A lighter turbine meant faster spool times, which cut down turbo lag significantly and allowed the car to hit full boost almost instantly. Pair that with a less restrictive dual exhaust system, a more aggressive engine control module, ECM tune, and free-flowing cylinder heads, and the result was brutal acceleration. Buick officially rated the GNX at 276 horsepower and 360 pounds-per-foot of torque, but everyone knew that that number was a lie. Independent tests found that the GNX was actually producing closer to 300+ horsepower and over 400 pounds-per-foot of torque. This meant that a turbocharged V6-powered Buick, yes, a Buick, was now faster than the Corvette, faster than the Ferrari 328 GTS, faster than the Porsche 911 Turbo, and even quicker than the Lamborghini Countach. Let that sink in for a second. And the numbers backed it up. Car and driver recorded a 0 to 60 miles per hour time of just 4.7 seconds and a quarter-mile run of 13.5 seconds at 102 miles per hour. For 1987, that was insanely fast. To put that into perspective, a brand new C4 Corvette took over 5.5 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour. This big, boxy, sinister Buick was blowing doors off legendary sports cars. But power, that was just one part of the equation. Buick knew that handling that kind of torque on rear-wheel drive chassis, especially one on GM's aging G-body platform, was a challenge. Without a proper suspension setup, the GNX would have been a burnout machine, struggling for grip. So, they went all in on a rear suspension overhaul. They added a longitudinal torque arm and a lateral panhard rod, which kept the rear axle planted under hard acceleration. Stiffer springs, upgraded shocks, and thicker stabilizer bars helped reduce body roll and gave the GNX a tighter, more controlled ride. The standard Grand National's 15-inch wheels were swapped out for 16-inch lightweight aluminium wheels, wrapped in 245/50 VR16 tires in the front and 255/50 VR16 tires in the rear. This wider rubber gave the GNX more grip than any Buick had ever seen before. Cooling was also a priority. That massive turbo was generating some serious heat, so Buick added functional front fender louvers to help dissipate heat from the engine bay. The transmission oil cooler helped the reinforced 204R automatic transmission from overheating under the intense loads of full throttle launches. Buick didn't want any weak points in this car. Inside, the GNX made sure drivers knew they were in something special. The standard Grand National had a digital gauge cluster, but Buick ditched it in favor of Stewart Warner analog gauges, a 160 miles per hour speedometer, an 8,000 RPM tachometer, and additional gauges for turbo boost, oil pressure, and water temperature. The black and grey bucket seats remained, but each GNX was fitted with a numbered commemorative plaque on the dashboard. But what if you wanted one? Good luck. Buick's original plan was to send one GNX to each of its top 500 dealers. The problem? There were over 2,700 Buick dealerships, and everyone wanted one. Buick eventually found a way to stretch the number to 547, but that still left thousands of dealers without a GNX to sell. Even the automotive press had a hard time getting their hands on one, since every single GNX was spoken for before they were even built. Buick couldn't allocate any cars to their press fleet. Instead, they invited selected magazines, one at a time, to GM's desert proving grounds in Arizona to test 2 GNX prototypes. Car and driver was one of the lucky few, and when they got behind the wheel, they knew Buick had done something unbelievable. The GNX wasn't just fast in a straight line. The suspension upgrades, the wider tires, and the improved weight distribution made it shockingly capable around corners. The price? $29,290. A whopping $10,995 more than a fully loaded Grand National. And that was just the sticker price. Some dealerships, well, they marked them up by $20,000. and there were reports of buyers paying as much as $75,000 just to get one. That was Porsche money in 1987, but for those who managed to snag one, it was worth every cent. This wasn't just the fastest Grand National ever built, it was the last true rear-wheel drive Buick before GM made the switch to front-wheel drive platforms in 1988. The GNX was the final chapter in a story that never should have happened. A turbocharged V6-powered muscle car that crushed Corvettes, humiliated Ferraris, and became one of the most collectible American cars ever made. Today, the GNX is one of the most valuable and sought-after muscle cars in history. Pristine, low-mileage examples regularly sell for over $200,000 at auctions. Some have even pushed past $300,000, proving that GNX was more than just a car, it was a statement. Buick had done the impossible. They'd taken a V6, slapped a turbo on it, and built a car that could outperform legends. And in doing so, they created one of the most iconic American cars of all time. So, what do you think? Was the Buick GNX the greatest sleeper muscle car ever? Or was it just a one-time fluke of 80s turbo engineering? Let us know in the comments. And if you love this deep dive, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next episode. Which legendary car should we cover next? Drop your suggestions below.